Bryce Harper doesn't get nearly enough coverage in the Philadelphia Phillies' current lineup. The numbers show it. So what can the Phillies do to fix this issue in 2026? Find out on today's episode.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We come to you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And Locked On Phillies, being part of the Locked On Podcast Network, is a big thing right now because we just became the #1 sports podcast network here at Locked On. So thank you so much for helping us do that. You might know me from some of my other work in the sports talk space. I've been on air over at 97.5 The Fanatic, doing sports talk radio here in Philadelphia for over 6 years. I've been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for the past 4 seasons, and this is now my 4th year as the host of Locked On Phillies. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Bryce Harper's not nearly protected enough in the Phillies lineup. The numbers show it. It's so stark when you look at them, and a lot of people have brought this up. We're going to lead off today's episode by talking about potential solutions to the Bryce Harper seeing too many pitches outside of the zone problem that the Phillies have had. We're also going to talk a little bit after that about a wild story that came out this weekend, detailing more about the interaction between Bryce Harper and MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred inside the Phillies clubhouse earlier this year when Rob Manfred met with the team to talk about the looming CBA negotiations, and some wild stuff being said about Harper from a very high-ranking MLB official. And we've got Mailbag Monday for the first time of the offseason, so we're going to run through some of your questions. It's a busy episode today, a lot to get into, and a lot on Bryce Harper. And when people look at Bryce Harper's numbers over the past couple of seasons, I completely understand why the response would be, he's not an elite-level baseball player anymore. Is he a good player? Beyond a shadow of a doubt. Is he a great player? Absolutely. Is he elite? Like top 20 players in the game, top 15 players in the game? Some of the numbers recently would tell you he is not. Injury has something to do with that. Has started to get more banged up as he gets deeper into his career. The eye test, when he is healthy and playing, would tell you this guy's still a feared hitter. So why aren't the numbers showing it? Well, a shout out to Paul Hembo, who does great work pulling up stats for ESPN, does awesome stuff on social media as well. This is where he first really started to build this conversation this offseason. Somebody had said something about Bryce Harper. Oh, sorry, it was Scott Boras had said something about Harper still sees the least amount of pitches in the zone of anybody in baseball. And Hembo went to the stats and was like, yeah, he's right. He sees the highest percentage of pitches outside the strike zone of any player in Major League Baseball. Let's first figure out where that comes from. Why is that the case? It's twofold. The first reason is because clearly the rest of baseball still views Bryce Harper as one of the more dangerous hitters on the face of the planet. If they thought he stunk, they'd be throwing him strikes. They don't throw him strikes because they don't want him to beat them. So the league will tell you by how they're approaching Bryce Harper, we do not want to pitch to this guy. That's more pitches outside the zone than Shohei Ohtani, than Cal Raleigh, than Aaron Judge, than Kyle Schwarber, than any other hitter in baseball. So if you want to say, well, Shohei gets walked a bunch, he doesn't see as many pitches outside the zone as Bryce Harper. And you could say that for everybody. So part of it is that he's still a feared hitter. But the other part of it is he spent a lot of this year batting third in the Philadelphia Phillies lineup. Turner bats leadoff. Schwarber bats in the 2-hole. Harper bats third. That's great for Kyle Schwarber, who you saw have a career year this year and will most likely get a gigantic payday because of it, runner-up for MVP in the National League. That's the type of year that Schwarber had. And part of that reason is because he had Trea Turner, who led the National League in batting average ahead of him. And he had Bryce Harper, still one of the more feared players in the game, behind him. But who's Bryce Harper have hitting behind him? Alec Bohm, JT Realmuto, Nick Castellanos, guys like that. And I'm not trying to take too much of a shot at those players individually, but they're not Bryce Harper. And you're not going to find another Bryce Harper clone to bat behind Bryce Harper to protect Bryce Harper. So what do you do, right? If you have Harper at the plate and you're not as afraid of the next guy, you work around Harper. And if he gets himself out, great. If he walks, go down to first base. We'll get JT out. We'll get Bohm out. We'll get Castellanos out. That's how teams are choosing to approach it. So that's the idea of where the problem comes from. You don't want to pitch to Harper. The guy behind Harper or the guys behind Harper don't scare you all that much. So you work around him and you let him not beat you. It's not so much that Harper has declined as it is that Major League Baseball has adjusted so much to who he is as a hitter, and the Phillies have not made the proper counter adjustment, which would be find somebody who can hit behind Bryce Harper so that you can't just work around him. Is there a solution in-house? It's a great question because I don't think there's an easy answer. I really like Trea Turner batting leadoff, especially if he's going to have years like he did this year. Schwarber clearly likes hitting in the 2-hole, and he needs protection as well. So if he comes back, I would really hate to move him out of the spot where he just hit 56 homers this past season. So I don't want to mess with the top two in the lineup, which means putting Turner behind Harper is out of the question, and putting Schwarber behind Harper is potentially out of the question. Some people might say, well, Schwarber would be great protection for Harper. Just flip him. Then Schwarber starts seeing less pitches in the zone. Harper's numbers go up. Schwarber's numbers go down. You end up with 6 in one hand and half dozen in the other. It's the same situation, just with a different player benefiting. So really what the Phillies need is to figure out who is the proper guy to hit behind Bryce Harper. They haven't had a true cleanup hitter for what feels like ages here in Philadelphia. And that's not a knock on the guys that can hit for power. Like Kyle Schwarber is a true cleanup hitter. He just doesn't bat cleanup in this lineup because they like him at 2, because they like Turner gets on, Schwarber drives him in. Seems to make sense, right? Harper protects him. It's the perfect spot for a power hitter in the lineup. So there are a couple of ways that you can do this. But I don't know that the Phillies have these players on the roster currently. Step 1 would be, or option 1, I should say, find somebody to bat leadoff that is not named Trea Turner. It will be a bit of an unconventional lineup. But for example, let's say the Phillies were to re-sign Harrison Bader. They believe in his ability to put together quality at bats. He bats leadoff. Schwarber bats in the 2-hole. Harper bats 3. Turner bats cleanup. Now, Trea Turner is not the face of a power hitter in Major League Baseball, right? You don't think power when you think of Trea Turner. But we're talking about getting people to throw Harper pitches. And Trea Turner led the National League in batting average. So you're not going to work around Harper happily to get to Trea Turner. Even though he's not going to hit the ball out of the yard often on you, he's going to get on. And that's going to create more haywire situations for pitchers. So that's one way you can do it. The other way is finally find a guy to bat cleanup. And I don't think that player exists on the roster. Who would it be? Let's run through some of the other candidates. JT Realmuto is not a cleanup hitter. Not enough pop. Nick Castellanos is not a cleanup hitter. Not enough pop. Also probably not going to be here next year because I imagine they trade him. Alec Bohm, not a cleanup hitter. I know I talked about Trea Turner could hit for average. There's a big gap between what Trea Turner is as a contact hitter and what Alec Bohm is as a contact hitter. Bohm's not bad, but if you're going to put a guy there that's going to bat like 260, 270, even up to 280, you want to see them hit more than 10 to 12 home runs a year. Otherwise, you better have someone batting over 300 in that spot if you're going to go full contact. So he's probably out as well. Brandon Marsh, too dependent against seeing righties. Also not really enough pop. Bryson Stott, same exact thing as Brandon Marsh. Harrison Bader, if you were to just keep Trea Turner at leadoff and then maybe bat him cleanup, not enough pop. Like, who is the right-handed power bat that the Phillies have? They don't have one. So maybe just maybe, that is the biggest goal of the offseason outside of re-signing Kyle Schwarber, and then secondarily looking at JT Realmuto to come back on a understandable contract that won't break the bank. One of those corner outfield spots, I think, has to go to a right-handed power hitter. And I talked about Miguel Andujar when I went through my offseason wish list. He's a guy that hits well for average with a little bit of pop. I wouldn't hate seeing him maybe bat leadoff, and then you go Schwarber, Harper, and then you could do the Turner thing that we're talking about. Because frankly, that right-handed power bat is going to be really hard to find on a manageable contract for a player that fits into the Phillies' range, which is win now. Unless Otto Kemp or Weston Wilson or Edmundo Sosa turn into something that they're not right now, you don't have the guy on the roster that's going to fill that out. And that's been one of the Philadelphia Phillies' main issues. And if I'm Bryce Harper, I'm sitting there saying, hey, you guys better figure this out, because you got the president of baseball operations saying, we'll see if he can be elite again. Maybe you get somebody so they actually throw me pitches and we can find out. I'd understandably be upset if I was Bryce Harper hearing these numbers, or if I'm Scott Boras, the agent representing Bryce Harper, I would peddle these numbers all over the place, because there's something to this. Does it absolve Bryce Harper of shortcomings this year or previous years? No. There are plenty of guys that don't see pitches that make something happen on the mistakes that they do see. But it's a very intriguing part of why the Phillies haven't worked, and something that I think needs to be a pretty darn high priority for this offseason. Coming up next, Bryce Harper is in the crosshairs of the commissioner, figuratively, but according to one quote that came out, maybe literally. We'll talk about some big baseball news that broke over the weekend from a wild story between Bryce Harper, Rob Manfred, and another high-ranking Major League Baseball official as we continue today's episode. Let's talk about FanDuel first, though, because the NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game, or you want to ride the hot hand, maybe you check in and you're like, hey, he's got like 6 of the last 7 buckets for his team. FanDuel has live bets on everything from who's going to score next to fourth quarter comebacks. So whether you believe in an individual player or the team as a whole, you can always find some action. Plus, you can even combine your bets and your live bets as well into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. Maybe you see 2 guys there having a great night. Take both their overs. Make more money on that if it hits. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And you might say, I don't really want to throw all that money down into my account right now. Well, good news. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So take that $5, put it on a real safe bet, as safe as you can find. Don't worry about the payout. You get the $300 in bonus bets when that bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's talk a little bit about this weird interaction between Bryce Harper and Rob Manfred, and then a story that came out this weekend, because the Rob Manfred-Bryce Harper dynamic was during this season. If you missed that, maybe you're not part of our Everydayers Club. And if you'd like to be part of our Everydayers Club, which we would love you to be, make sure that if you're checking us out on the YouTube, you hit that subscribe button. It's free and easy to subscribe to Locked On Phillies on YouTube, and it'll get you notifications when new episodes are posted. It's a no-brainer. So if you want to see more of our content, please subscribe. And if you can't watch, but you want to still listen, we're available wherever you get your podcasts. We're going to do Monday through Friday, daily Philadelphia Phillies content. It's your number one place for it. So go ahead and check that out. And if you like it, rate and review. I'd appreciate it if you did that. So this Bryce Harper conversation is, again, wild. Let's set the framework. Back in season, Rob Manfred came and he talked to the Philadelphia Phillies. He was going around talking to all the clubs about the upcoming CBA negotiation that's going to happen after the 2026 season, salary cap, salary floor, all of this stuff. Just kind of outlining why he feels the way that he does and why he's going to take the position that he is. Bryce Harper wanted no part of it. He said, if you're going to talk about a salary cap, get the bleep out of our locker room or our clubhouse. So very standoffish Bryce Harper was, because he does not want to see a salary cap, and he does not want to see earnings cap for the players. Bryce Harper, though he does not speak for everybody, is a very influential figure in Major League Baseball. He's been doing it as long as anybody. He's been in baseball his whole life. He's one of the faces of the game. So while it may be presumptuous to speak for the rest of the team by doing that, he has enough cachet that he can say that type of thing or express that sentiment, maybe in a little bit more of a professional, diplomatic way than cursing at the commissioner of the sport. But he didn't want to hear it. And him and Rob Manfred had that conversation, and people in the Phillies clubhouse were not happy about it because some of the other players wanted to hear him out. There's all this stuff that has been kind of whispered around about that Bryce Harper, Rob Manfred interaction. And this is not so much the on the field stuff of baseball, but it'll become very important when the labor negotiations begin. But then, and I thought all of this was settled. This under the water under the bridge, right? Everything's taken care of. That was months ago. I'm sure they're over it. And then we get a story this weekend where apparently after that goes on, a high-ranking MLB deputy told Bryce Harper, quote, "That's how people end up in a ditch." I mean, that is a not even a thinly veiled threat. That is like a flat-out threat for questioning the commissioner. And it wasn't, that is how people end up out of the league. It's not, that's going to give you bad standing with some of your teammates. It's, that's how people end up in a ditch. Now, that could be hyperbole, but all we have is the quote right now. So you can only, this is a problem with saying stuff like that, whether you mean it or not. When it's written down in black and white, people are taking that as you're threatening one of the biggest faces of your game. I'm not here to do the, well, did Bryce Harper deserve them to be mad at him because he stepped out of line? But that's for the individual interpretation. So if you think that that's fair play, and because Bryce Harper came after the commissioner, people who want to defend the commissioner can come after Bryce Harper, I would say that both sides could have been significantly more diplomatic with their wording and how they decided to do this. But remember all those times that I told you, we might not see baseball in 2027. These labor negotiations are going to get nasty. We are a year away still from the expiration of the current collective bargaining agreement, the CBA. And you've already got a high-ranking MLB deputy telling one of the faces of the game that if you question the commissioner, you might end up in a ditch. Do you think if you're a player that says that Major League Baseball is operating in good faith right now with your best interests at heart? Or does it sound like a darn mobster from The Sopranos coming to Bryce Harper's door saying, hey, you better not question the commissioner anymore or else something bad's going to happen to you. You're going to end up with a horse head in your bed like it's The Godfather. It reads like organized crime when you read that quote from a high-ranking MLB deputy. And that's just proof positive that this is going to get uglier before it gets pretty. If you're already going after people like this from both sides, right? Because Harper wasn't exactly friendly in the way that he questioned Rob Manfred. It is the pinnacle, the paramount example of why there's a very good chance that we lose a lot, if not all, of the 2027 Major League Baseball season. So prepare yourself, folks. You better enjoy the heck out of baseball in 2026. Because if that's any indication, these sides could not be further apart. And again, not playing the blame game. I'm not trying to defend Bryce saying, hey, he was in the right. This is ridiculous. Throw that guy in jail. And I'm also not going to defend the guy that said you could end up in a ditch if you question the commissioner. What I will say is it's the perfect example, again, of where these two sides are on these negotiations. And I'll even say negotiations, quote unquote, because that doesn't feel like very negotiating to me. It feels like a threat and felt very standoffish from the reports that we heard about Bryce Harper's initial interaction with Rob Manfred. Sport could turn into a mess real quick, folks. And that's why it's important that the Philadelphia Phillies get this offseason right, because there are a lot of tricky nuances to it. And a lot of you out there, see some of the tricky nuances, or at least are aware of them, which is why I love to hear from people who listen or watch the podcast. And that's why we're going to do, coming up next, our first Mailbag Monday of the offseason. Got some great questions from some awesome listeners. We're going to run through them, and I'm going to give you my thoughts as we continue today's episode. Let's talk about Game Time first, though, because not only do they bring you today's episode, but they bring you the best way to purchase tickets on the face of the planet. The NFL season is back, and honestly, there's nothing better than being in the stadium surrounded by fans. Here in Philadelphia, you had a couple weeks off for the bye week. So now that football is back playing, Birds are in Lambeau this week. They come back, they've got the Lions. That could be for the top seed in the NFC next week at Lincoln Financial Field. I say next week. That's this Sunday. Getting tickets can be a hassle. Queues, login screens, prices jumping at checkout. It's frustrating. And that's why I recommend you use Game Time, just like I do when I go to the games. They're the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. Game Time's fast, easy, and backed by the Game Time guarantee, which means you're always going to get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included. So the price you see is the price you pay. It's the best app out there for getting you in the building, whether it's football, basketball, hockey right now, maybe some college sports. Maybe you're looking at a comedy show or concert or theater performance. They got everything. It's not just sports. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and make sure you use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, and go. And download Game Time today. Let's talk about some of your questions. Do I have answers? Some yes, some no. Listen, I am only human. If you have questions for me and I want to get back to you and I don't have a good answer on them, I'll tell you I don't, but I'll give you theories. So let's start out with this from Sean Fitzpatrick on Twitter, who responded to our request for Mailbag Monday questions. And every weekend, we're going to be putting out a tweet from Locked On Phillies at LO_Phillies. And you can find that tweet and reply with questions, baseball, Phillies, everything. Just whatever you're thinking on your mind. I do this podcast for you guys. So I want to make sure that your voices are heard. But Sean Fitzpatrick checks in and asks, do you see a player like Otto Kemp having a more prominent role next year? Maybe some at bats at second base against left-handed pitchers, some games at third if Bohm is dealt. I do see Otto Kemp having a bigger role with the team this year. Do I want that? Now that's a totally different story. Here's why I see Otto Kemp having a bigger year with the team. One, from a roster standpoint, you don't really have right-handed pop. There is a chance, and I'm not banking on it. Like, I would not put the 2026 Philadelphia Phillies season and have it rest on the shoulders of whether or not Otto Kemp's going to hit 30 home runs. That is ridiculous. That's too much to expect from the kid. But he has right-handed pop. He showcased that in stretches this past year. It was his first year at the major league level. There's a chance that you could see some projection. And it's a spot. We talked about it in the Bryce Harper protection thing segment earlier on in the show. It's a deficiency of the Phillies. If you're a right-handed hitter, they can hit the ball out of the yard. You can play on this team. And Otto Kemp does that a little bit in a small sample size, which is why I can't bank on it. But I think the Phillies realize how weak they are in right-handed power. I think that's why Dave Dombrowski has been starting to peddle the narrative that we really like Otto Kemp. We have a lot of faith in Otto Kemp. We think Otto Kemp's a really nice player. I think they're trying to talk up that narrative so that, one, maybe Otto Kemp gains some confidence from hearing his front office talk about him that way. But two, fans start to understand that he's going to get some opportunities. So it's a great question. Do I have high hopes for the experiment? No. Do I think we're going to see it? Absolutely. They're going to try that. And if Alec Bohm is dealt, that's more opportunity. Second base, I don't see, just to go to that portion of the question, only because Edmundo Sosa is he's so good as a utility guy. So I think he's going to get the first reps in a platoon situation. I don't know that Kemp will be a platoon guy. I think Kemp will be a start occasionally and pinch hit guy for the Philadelphia Phillies, unless they move Bohm, and then all bets are off. And hey, they tried him in the outfield a lot in the minors this past year. They tried it a little bit at the major league level. They started him in the outfield in the playoff game. Maybe he's a corner outfield option as well as part of a platoon. But I don't see Kemp as more than a platoon player at this point. A checks in. This is my guy, AJ. I play softball against AJ. So we played against each other a couple weeks ago. And we had this conversation in person. But he says, doubling down on our conversation on the softball field, does Bo Bichette make sense given the Bohm trade looming and Bregman costing too much? It's interesting because Bo Bichette is a player who is predominantly a shortstop. The Phillies do not have an opening at shortstop. Could you move him to a corner infield spot, like third base if Alec Bohm is traded? I'd imagine you could. Could you play him at second base? Yeah, I mean, if you play shortstop, you can play second. It may not be his ideal position, but the important thing you're looking at is he's a really, really good bat to bring in to add more average to the lineup. If the Phillies trade Alec Bohm, they will have a need at third base. If that need they believe can be filled by Alex Bregman, they're going to be shelling out a lot of money. But I don't know that there's a big enough gap between what Bregman's going to cost and what Bichette is going to cost to say, hey, he's the quote-unquote cheaper option. Right? Bo Bichette is the younger player. He is the better player in the moment right now, I think. But Bregman's kind of more the savvy vet where he's in win now mode and he's already accomplished that feat a couple of times in his career, knows what it takes to win. Bo Bichette does not have a ring, which is not necessarily an individual thing, but being part of a championship team, it rubs off on you a little bit. So could Bo Bichette be in play? Sure. But he's going to be just as expensive as Alex Bregman. And it's going to be another long-term deal. And I don't know if the Phillies, if they're going to re-sign Schwarber and probably re-sign Real Muto, I don't think they're going to commit another big long-term, like 5, 6, 7-year deal to a different player this offseason outside of those deals with Schwarber and Real Muto. They won't be 6, 7 years, those guys. Yeah, I said the numbers. Sorry. But they won't be like that length of a contract. And then you look at that and say, okay, are we going to throw even more money, though, on a guy to play third, to trade Alec Bohm, to create a hole where we don't have one? My gut feeling is no, we will not see it. My feeling as a would it work is absolutely. You can find a place for Bo Bichette on this team. I just don't think the Phillies are that committed to add more payroll to that level. So great question. And a guy that's intriguing in Bo Bichette, but not something that I think the Phillies are going to truly go after this offseason. And then 2 questions from Steve G. 412. First one, if we lose Schwarber, do they go for Alonso or Bellinger? Now, I can't tell if you're asking Alonso or Bellinger, like in general, like do they go for either of those guys, or are you asking me to pick which one they go after? So I'll do both. Yes, I do think they would go after Pete Alonso or Cody Bellinger if they did not re-sign Kyle Schwarber. You have to find a way to create that power. And for that reason, that'll be my answer to the second question. Alonso would be the guy that they would target more than Bellinger because he is more the Kyle Schwarber type of player. Cody Bellinger is probably the more well-balanced player. Well, definitely the more balanced player. But Pete Alonso would fill the Kyle Schwarber role on this team, and he's also a righty bat. So you'd be looking at a situation where you could flip the handedness and create an opportunity to maybe change the dynamic of this lineup. That way you don't have all your power coming from the left side. So yes, if they don't re-sign Schwarber, they're going to look at Alonso and Bellinger. But I think they're re-signing Kyle Schwarber. And then the second question that Steve had here, which will be our final of this Mailbag Monday, does trading Bohm make sense because they need more power from third base? It does, right? It does make sense to move on from Alec Bohm if you need more power at the hot corner. Move a guy, bring in someone who's a right-handed power bat, which is what third basemen are supposed to be. But I don't know who that player is. Bregman's too old and wants too long of a deal. That feels like a bad investment. Murakami, the third baseman being posted out of Japan. Phillies don't win the Japanese sweepstakes ever. They haven't, right? So I imagine they'll be on the outside looking in at that unless they make an incredible offer. And even then, you might just say, yeah, I want to play on the West Coast or I want to play for this organization for whatever reason. So there's no ties to the organization. It's a harder pitch to make if you haven't had like a Japanese star before. So that would be tough. But there are only a handful of names out there. Eugenio Suarez, 1-year deal. I don't think the Phillies are going to shell out for him, especially on a 1-year deal, especially at his age. I don't know where that right-handed power bat comes from at third base, which is why the more I think about it, the more I doubt that they're going to trade Alec Bohm. And it's why when I went through my offseason wish list, I looked more at Brendan Rodgers at second base and moving on from Bryson Stott than anything with Alec Bohm at third. So great questions. I appreciate everybody throwing some in. There were a couple that I did not get a chance to get to, but we're going to continue to do this every Monday throughout the entirety of the offseason. Mailbag Monday, your chance for your voice to be heard. So I appreciate you sending in the questions, and I look forward to hearing more from you next time. But that's all for today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Thank you so much for joining us. Once again, we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcast network. And please make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing to the YouTube, all that great stuff that really helps us out here on Locked On Phillies and helps you stay up to date with our content. I'll talk to you tomorrow on our next episode.